So the best way to handle late work that supports students' brain development is
Teach based on science.
Hey everyone, Matt Thomas here. Thanks for watching. So it's coming up to the end of the year, and let's be real, we're all teachers. You're probably going to have some students turn in late work. No matter how many times you tell the class, hey, everything's got to be due by this day, it's got to be due, you're still going to have, a student or two or 10 that turn in a bunch of work at the last minute or even, the night before grades are due. So how do we handle that? Because it can be frustrating. So this video is going to address the best way to handle student late work. Now, as a researcher, I need to define the term best. What do I mean by that? So I'm defining this as this way. This is the best way to handle student late work based on how the teenage brain develops. So this is the best way, like how do you handle late work? This is the best way to do it based on how their brain is developing at this time. So you might not like my answer, but the best way to handle student late work that supports their brain development is to accept late work without a lecture, but rather with a thank you and a reminder. Now, let me back up and kind of explain what I mean by that. So, teenagers go through developmental stages. And as adults, oftentimes we forget that. We all went through that developmental stage. And oftentimes we kind of disregard that. But the teenage brain does not fully develop until they're in their early 30s. And let's talk about the frontal lobe really quickly because I've talked about this in other videos. The frontal lobe in their teenage years is only 80% mature, and the wiring is still at the very thinnest. Why that's important? The frontal lobe is the part of the brain that really focuses on long-term thinking, which is planning, critical thinking, consequences, organization, rationale or analysis, explanation of things, attention span, social behavior. That's all part of the frontal lobe. And that does not fully develop until a person's in their early 30s. So as an adult, when we think, oh, they should know better, not so much. When we ask our teenagers, what were you thinking? Why did you do that? Sometimes they'll say, I don't know. And that's a very valid reasoning. And so as teenagers' brains develop, here's the thing. There are times when, they're behind. And I always say this, as a teacher, my job is to prepare my teenagers to be great adults. I can't be mad when they're not there yet. And so there's going to be times when our students will go, oh my gosh, I'm getting an F in class. It's the day before grades or a week before grades or whatever. Let me do all this stuff and then turn it in. And so those students that to support brain development, there's going to be a time when they're finally getting it. Like we've told them like, hey, this is late. You don't turn it in late. You got to do it on time, And then so they're finally getting it. Now, granted, maybe you finished grades 2 days ago and maybe they hopefully would have got it, 6 months ago and turned in all their work on time, but they didn't. But they're getting it now. And they're like, all right, I finally realize I need to get my work in. So students are on a journey, right? Our job as adults are to kind of like lead them along this educational journey and this developmental journey. And so as a teenager, when they finally are like, all right, I'm getting all my work in finally, and they go to a teacher and they go to turn the work in and the teacher says no, that can be very frustrating for a teenager whose brain finally develops enough to where they're like, all right, I'm going to get my work in on time. And you're like, no, it's too late. Like, what? That's frustrating. As opposed to, all right, thanks for turning it in. And here's where I say, don't give them a lecture. Don't be like, Joey, you're turning it in late. Joey knows he's turning it in late, right? He's finally getting it like, all right, I need to turn my work in on time. So this is why I would say when a student turns the work in on time, as frustrating as it is for us, we have to understand our brains, if you're over the age of the early 30s, are for the most part fully developed. Theirs isn't. And we have to understand that that's a real thing. So when a teenager finally turns the thing in, oh my gosh, thank you so much. So I'm creating that thank you for turning the work in. I can remind them like, hey, it would have been a lot easier if you turned it in on time. They're like, I know, I get it. Like, say it with a smile. There's your reminder. Don't give them a lecture because they know that they're late. And what happens is, we've talked about this before, action, prediction, reaction, right? The brain makes meaning by going through an action, predicting what's going to happen next time that action happens, and then creating a reaction with their body. So if a student knows every time I turn this late work, I'm just going to get a lecture, they might stop turning in the late work. And the goal is you do want them to turn the work in. So when the student turns in the work, thank them. Hey, Joey, hey, thanks for turning in late. You know, a little close to the ending, right? Maybe next time, maybe turn it in a little earlier. And they're like, yeah, sorry about that. You're like, no problem. Thanks for doing it. Like reward, like thank them for that. Now, that'll be more. And then throughout the semester, let's say this was first semester, throughout second semester, if they're getting behind on work, be like, remember Joey, remember last time you kind of turned it all in at the last second? And they're like, yeah, you're right. So it's like a friendly reminder. Now I should say that, well, let me get to this. So a couple things before we end this up. In the teenage mind, right? If you're saying, no, I need to create responsibility with them. I need to say like, nope, you cannot turn any late work in. That's going to create responsibility. So next time they'll turn it in. Doesn't always work that way, because what they'll, in their mind, remember their frontal lobe, their analysis part of their brain is not fully developed. So analysis, rationale, that can be a struggle for them. They may actually see that you're not helping them, that you're stopping them, that you're in the way. So when they go tell their mom, I tried to turn the work in and the teacher wouldn't let me, they really believe that. And now the parents who just hear it from their child's perspective now have to advocate for their kids, which is why you get the phone calls or the emails, etc. Keep in mind, these are 14-year-olds, right? They don't have the rationale yet. So in their mind, you're not helping them. And so you're not teaching them responsibility. Now, a reminder and a kind of like, a nudge as along the way, along the journey, that's supporting them. That's helping them. Now, here's what I would also suggest. So if you go, hey, I do take late work in, but it's like 50% off or 70% off or whatever. There are times when maybe you take points off on a case-by-case basis. So let's say you have a student who, let's say has a 45% in class. I don't know. And at the last week turns in, 7 or 8 assignments. And I should say this, let's say the assignments are done well. I'm not saying the ones that are just not done well. And you're like, dude, you're turning this in, I can't give you any credit. I'm not talking about those. I mean the ones that were done well. If you take off, let's say you take off a major amount of points and they still don't pass the class. You might have to, as a teacher, adjust how many points you take off to best support them, right? Every teacher knows what a D- is. And so if you're like, well, that's not fair, that's not equitable, the teenage mind develops differently with every single teenager. And it's almost not fair or equitable that it doesn't develop at the same time. So there may be times when you go, hey, if I take 50% off of everything, this student still isn't passing. And that's not going to help them either. So maybe there's times, and of course I wouldn't announce that to the class, right? You just like, hey, Joe, I'm going to give you, in your mind, like I'm going to give them full credit here. This, I'm going to go half credit. At least, like I said, every teacher knows what a D- is. So keep in mind, our job is to best support these students along their journey. The way we think best supports them as a fully matured adult brain may not be what they really need at their 14-year-old, not as fully matured adult brain. And please understand, as frustrating as it is, know that if you take late work without a lecture, with a thank you and maybe a reminder like, hey, maybe next time, Joey, turn it in on time. Okay, cool. With a smile, right? They're going to remember that they could come to you when they needed help and you were a positive influence and you helped them along the journey. Remember, they don't think the way we do, right? We want them to think one way, like, hey, this builds responsibility. They might not see it that way, and our job is to kind of help them along this journey. Just know that if you do take late work with a smile, maybe a reminder to turn it in later, you are most likely supporting them at their developmental stage. And I say most likely because there are going to be the couple, 1 or 2 students that are taking advantage of a situation. We get that. But our job is to really try to support as many students as we can along their developmental stage. Thanks for watching.